No. Darn. We discussed this.
It was a pretty definite no.
Yeah. You never even got it all out. I was learning to answer.
There's no ambiguity in
I
his
knew where you were
answers.
going. Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. Tuesday, March 7th, 6:30. We're going to change the agenda somewhat. Number 2, which would normally be committee reports, we're going to move it after number 8, because we have some guests here tonight, and I'll be introducing them a little later on, but we'll go after 8, we'll go with committee reports so that they can come and share with us and then be on their way without any added time. So first of all, I'll ask then if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. All right, first resolution is for the minutes of the council meeting held February 21st. So I need a mover and a seconder, Councillor Yem and Councillor Butler. So it's number R 2023-56, moved by Councillor Yem, seconded by Councillor Butler, that the minutes of the council meeting held February 21st, 2023 be adopted as published. All in favor? Very unanimously. So that was number resolution to adopt, and now we're going to, as I mentioned, move committees. So we'll start with the presentation of the 2022 audited financial statements. For those of you on council that are new, this is Oscar Poloni from KPMG. Yes, and welcome, Oscar.
Thank you, Your Worship.
And the floor is yours, and I'll just move underway.
Well, thank you very much. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of council. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be here today. We were talking about how during the pandemic, things have been remote, and we've now started to go back to in-person attendance. It's always a pleasure to be in Nipissing and to meet with council. So just for my purposes, that's actually the second presentation. So maybe if we could just slip to the first one. Sorry for being picky.
No, it's good.
Robin,
There you go.
So we're very pleased to be here tonight to present our audit findings report for the Township of Nipissing for the year ended December 31st, 2022. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So our audit is complete. The audit started the week of January the 23rd. I will say this is one of the earliest municipalities that we audit in Northern Ontario. It's the earliest one that I have going. So the audit is complete. In undertaking our audit, we've undertaken our audit in accordance with Canadian auditing standards. So these are the rules about how auditors audit municipalities. When we audit, and if you read the opinion, what you'll notice is it doesn't say the financial statements are accurate, because that would require us to test every transaction. Rather, what it says is that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects, and materiality is the threshold of errors that we can absorb before we either require your staff to fix them or we change our audit opinion. And so materiality in the public sector is generally calculated as a percentage of revenues or expenditures because you're not for profit. In the for-profit sector, it's basically calculated on net income. So it's calculated as 3% of the prior year's expenses, which gives us a materiality of $116,000. Now, in calculating materiality, we specifically excluded the expense related to your landfill liability. And the reason for that is because it's unbudgeted. It's more of an accounting adjustment than anything else. So we took it out. The other reason we took it out is if you go back far enough, it had a tendency to swing a lot. So it was for lack of a better term, inconsistent, unreliable, if you will. So we pulled it. Now, materiality determines a number of different parts of our audit. We use it, for example, to calculate our sample sizes. But from council's perspective, probably the most important use of materiality is to determine what we call the posting threshold. And that's the level above which, if we have any mistakes that we found that haven't been corrected, we actually have to report to council. And it's calculated as 5% of materiality or $5,800. So if you think about your financial statements and you look at it, you've got somewhere in the range of $19–20 million of assets. You've got in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million of expenses and revenues. $5,800 and over, that's the threshold that we use to report to council. I'm very happy to announce that we actually don't have any uncorrected audit differences above the posting thresholds. So this audit, pretty clean. We are going to issue what's called an unqualified audit opinion. It is the highest level of assurance that you can receive under Canadian auditing standards. So from an auditing perspective, it really doesn't get much better than this. There's three things that we need to have happen with respect to finalizing the audit. We need council to actually approve the financial statements. That's a requirement under Canadian auditing standards. We need to get a management representation letter, which is basically your staff telling us they've disclosed all the information, there's nothing they're hiding, that type of stuff. And then we also need to finalize our file documentation. So because of the timing, we're going to need a couple of days just to clean things up, to make sure everything's okay. I have no expectation that the financial statements are going to change. So just to let you know. So that's a bit of an overview from an audit perspective. And maybe if we can go to the next slide, please. So just to talk about the statements, the first statement is your statement of financial position. And what this is this is a snapshot of your assets and your liabilities and your surplus at December 31st, 2022. So in terms of some of the higher numbers and some of the changes from the prior year, you can see that between cash and short-term investments, the municipality had roughly $4.1 million of those investments. That's up about $500,000 from last year, where it was about $3.6 million. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that you had a surplus this year, which brings your cash balances up. And secondly, there was some debt that was issued for a vehicle purchase that, because you didn't have to pay for that out of cash flow, but you actually had debt proceeds for it, it gave you a bit of a lift with respect to your bank balances. In terms of other assets, you can see there's taxes receivable and accounts receivable. These are monies owed to the municipality at year end. So the balances have gone up by about $92,000 from the prior year. Your HST receivable is up by about $29,000. So the municipality gets a portion of its HST back. I believe it's 87% overall because it's a blended provincial rate. So depending on when you incur expenses, depending on when you buy capital, this number will change at the end of the year. The GICs that you purchase pay interest at the end, so you record the interest as you earn it. So there's $36,000 worth of interest that's been earned, but not yet received, so that's receivable. Then your taxes receivable have gone up by about $27,000, partly because your levy's gone up as well. So maybe if you could go to the next slide, please. For the information of council, this is just a bit of a breakdown with respect to your taxes and accounts receivable on what I'll call the left-hand slide. You can see that from a tax perspective, it's broken down between current taxes and tax arrears. So your total taxes are about $150,000 in total. On the right-hand side, we have your taxes receivable as a percentage of your tax levy. And so what those percentages reflect is for every dollar that you've charged in taxes, how much is outstanding at year end. And so your percentage is about 5%. It is a little bit higher than the prior year, but what you can see is that it's consistently gone down over the last 6 to 7 years. And I will say, council, in comparison to other municipalities, this is a pretty low percentage. So from a collectability perspective, we're not seeing a lot of pressure here. Other municipalities that are suffering some fairly major economic disruptions, for example, their tax arrears percentages in some cases will go to 20 to 30%. So You can see other receivables include your HST and the interest receivable, and then there's small amounts that are outstanding, somewhere in the tune of $4,000 to $5,000. So maybe if you could go to the next slide, please. So in terms of your liabilities, what we call current liabilities, which is your accounts payable, your accrued liabilities, and your deferred revenues, these are fairly consistent on a year-over-year basis. So this amount represents expenses that are incurred prior to year end but paid after year end, and also any grants or other revenues that you haven't earned yet. And so we'll talk on the next slide a bit of what those components are. You can see that there is municipal debt. This is debt that you issue to purchase capital. Under the Municipal Act, you're not actually allowed to borrow for operations, only for capital. So this number's gone up about $216,000 compared to the prior year. There was $331,000 of new debt that was issued for a tandem truck, which brings this number up. And there was about $115,000 of principal payments made, which brings this number down. What you'll see is that your interest rates range anywhere from 2.67% to 5.76%. Obviously, the most recent debt that you issue reflects the current borrowing rates. And I don't think council needs an auditor to tell you what's happened to interest rates. What you'll see is that in addition to the principal payments of $115,000, there was $15,000 of interest expense incurred during the year. There's also a liability with respect to your landfill closure. So when you have a landfill, when it's full, you're required to close the landfill, and you're also required to monitor the landfill for leakage. And the rule under the provincial legislation is it's a minimum of 25 years or the contaminating lifespan of the landfill, whichever is larger. So if you think about this liability, what the accounting rule says is every time you put garbage into that landfill, you get closer to realizing the closure. So that's what happens with the cost. So as you fill up the landfill, there's more and more of that expense that has to be recorded on your books. So you retain an engineering firm, Pynchon, to come in and do the assessment. And basically what they say is, this is how much we think it's going to cost us to close the landfill. This is what percentage of it is full. So let's say, I'm just going to do hypothetical, it's $1 million. If you're 40% full, that's $400,000. And then what you have to do is you have to present value the money to today, because you may not be closing the landfill for a number of years. In the case of Nipissing, there's actually two landfills that you have, one which is approaching closure much sooner than the other. So the numbers will move a bit. I just want to say that consistent with every other municipality that I deal with, you do not budget for landfill closure costs. And I want council to understand something very clear. The number on your financial statements is $1,898,000. This is an accounting number. You are not going to be required to cut a check for $1,898,000. Rather, you will pay this over that 25-year monitoring period. Okay, this is an accounting number. I don't want to use the word pretend, but it's not in your budget. And we'll explain it a little bit later. So next slide, please. So if you look at your accounts payable and accrued liabilities, they're about $256,000 compared to $251,000 the year before. And we've provided council just a bit of a breakdown. There's about $90,000 of advanced property tax payments where people have prepaid their taxes. Because they prepaid them, it's not your money. So technically we pulled it back and we've classified it as a deferred revenue. You'll take that into income next year. There's about $50,000 worth of deposits. These are roads deposits, developer deposits, recreation fee deposits. And once again, you haven't earned that money yet, so we set it up on your books as a liability. As you earn it, you bring it into income. The Ontario Provincial Police invoices you for December, you pay that in January, so that's a bill that's outstanding. That's about $26,000. And then there's a variety of different amounts owing for staff, for accrued vacation, accrued wages, and overtime. You're required to record all of your salary expenses up until December 31st. So to the extent that they have banks that are earned but not paid, you have to book them. Audit fee is $14,000, so that's the price. And then there's other amounts that are outstanding as well. So a bit of a buildup with respect to your accounts payable. What you'll see, council, very consistent on a year-over-year basis. There's nothing significant or unusual that's out there. In terms of deferred revenue, there's two amounts that are deferred. One for federal gas tax, and under the agreement that you have with gas tax, it's a multi-year funding period. You don't have to spend it when you get it. You're actually allowed to bank up your gas tax and spend it on specific projects that happen. The issue though is that because you don't actually earn it until you spend it, you can't take it into income, so you set it up as a deferred revenue. The next one is for parkland, and so under the terms of the Municipal Act and other acts of provincial legislation, when somebody develops a subdivision, they have to give you a piece of property for parkland. You can take cash in lieu of that. Those funds are technically restricted, so you set them up as a deferred revenue as well. Okay, these are very common. You'll find them in almost every municipality. So from a gas tax perspective, there was $122,000 of gas tax that was received last year, but you hadn't used yet, you haven't spent it, so it's deferred revenue. During the year, you received an additional $129,000 from the feds. There was $2,700 worth of interest that was earned on that. And then you took $146,000 of that and you used it for roads capital projects. So that shows you how you've gone from the $122,000 to the $108,000. The parkland revenue, generally consistent with the prior year, some interest on it. Where this comes up is when you have big developments with subdivisions and stuff like that. Clearly didn't happen last year. So that's a bit of the deferred revenue. If you can move to the next page, please. So towards the bottom of the financial statement, we have what they call non-financial assets. These are assets that you own that you're not actually going to convert into cash. So the biggest one is your investment in your tangible capital assets. This is the investment that the municipality has made in your roads, in your buildings, in your fleet, basically in your infrastructure and equipment. This building, for example. So what happens from an accounting perspective is when you buy a capital asset, you don't expense it, you set it up on the books and you write it off over its useful life through amortization. So during the year, your tangible capital assets went up by about $282,000 to $18.3 million. There was $976,000 worth of capital that was purchased in the year. That brings the number up. And there was $694,000 of amortization expense, which brings the number down. So just for the information of council, we tried to summarize some of the major capital addition. There was roads work for about $359,000. Once again, a big chunk of this was funded through gas tax. There's the Western Star tandem truck, which was financed through the loan proceeds. There's new municipal software, the Town Suite program, for about $111,000. There's new playground equipment of $85,000 that was funded by FedNor. There's a new radio tower for fire services for about $57,000. And a portable signal light for about $30,000. These are the major capital additions that you would have made. Other non-financial assets include prepaid expenses, which is basically your insurance, and inventories. Your inventories are up this year. You had higher stores of fuel at year end and higher stores of aggregate at year end, so the numbers come up and down. So that is effectively your statement of financial position, if you will. If you go to the next slide, please. This is your statement of operations. And what this is this is a summary of your revenues and your expenses for the year and your surplus. So I know it may seem counterintuitive for your auditor to tell you this, but as we're going to describe in a couple of slides, you actually can't rely on this financial statement. And the reason you can't rely on this financial statement is because of the accounting rules around capital. And if you've been on council before, you would have heard this spiel, but the accounting rules are different. So I mentioned how when you buy an asset, you don't expense it, but you put it on your books and you write it off over time. If you get a grant for your asset, it comes into income automatically. So what that means is if I spend $100,000 on a road and it's funded through a grant, my expense will be about $4,000 a year because I take that $100,000 and I amortize it over 25 years, but that $100,000 grant hits my revenue in the year. And the reason why is because it's not repayable, so it's income. And so what you'll find is in years where you have heavy grants, you have a tendency to have big surpluses. In years where you don't, your amortization expense actually erodes it. The other reason why this financial statement isn't necessarily reliable for council's decision-making purpose is if you remember that discussion about the landfill and how as you put garbage into it, the liability goes up. That expense is on your books, but you're not cutting a check for it and you're not paying for it until the landfill closes and 25 years afterwards. So there are accounting adjustments that you have to be careful about because your surplus isn't really your surplus.
So that 1.8 million broken down over 25 years. So we put 72,000 a year into that to carry that?
If you do the math, that's kind of how it works. What you find is you'll pay a big chunk up front when you close the landfill. As you monitor the landfill, you're going to pay something every year, and then every couple of years or every infrequently, you're going to have bigger chunks. So it's bad, but once you close your landfill, your expenses look like this. You close it, then it comes down, and it blips, and it blips, and it blips. And we're not going to say it's a heartbeat, but it's pretty close. So to your point, you can't take the 1.8 million and divide by 25 because from a timing perspective, it doesn't work.
Oh,
Yeah. And I understand pensions joining, so they can have a discussion about that as well. So with that in mind, just a bit of a discussion, you can see your total revenues are about $4.6 million. This is up from just under 4 million last year. That's an increase of about 17%. Part of that is you have more tax. Your levy went up by about $160,000, but also you have higher government grants this year, including the federal gas tax. Your grant revenue on a year-over-year basis is up by about 353,000. And remember, council, once again, if it's capital, all of the grant comes in, the expenses get amortized over time. Your other revenues are up by about $150,000. There's the interest revenue on the GICs, that's up by about 67,000. And your building permit fees are up by about $66,000 year over year. I talked about interest rates. With the pandemic, everything came to a screeching halt. Development started to pick up again. So what we're seeing across the sector is a lot of user fees are starting to go up in comparison to prior years because the pandemic, less of an impact. And if we go to the next slide, please. On the left-hand side, these are your grant revenues. So your largest single source of funding is the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. This is an unconditional grant program that the province provides to rural and northern municipalities. You generally don't find OMPF in Southern Ontario. So this is more of a northern grant. You can see that number is around $600,000. It's your largest source. Then what you have is you have a series of capital grants. So OCIF, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, is a capital program. Gas tax, as we've mentioned, is a capital program. NORDS is a provincial funding program. That's for capital as well. You're using it for roads project. And then the FedNor funding, which is federal, was used to pay for your playground equipment. So these are all capital sources. What you can see is OCIF and gas tax were there last year. You have discretion over how much you bring in. The NORDS program is new and the FedNor grant is new. Now the NORDS funding is actually 2 years worth of funding. It's last year's and this year's funding. The issue is you didn't find out about it until March. Your financial statements were already done. And so what the accounting rule says is you pick it up. Next year, when we show this graph, next year's number is going to be lower than this year's number because next year's number is only going to be 1 year. So on the right-hand side of the graph, these are user fees and other revenues. Last year's numbers the graph is actually reversed. 2022 is the yellow bar and 2021 is the blue bar, sorry. You can see your building permits and your interest costs are higher. Landfill services, generally consistent. Roads and recreation are up, once again, because you've had more activity. Fire services, there were some big fire fees last year that didn't repeat this year. So that's basically your revenues. If you move to the next slide, please. From a expense perspective, you can see your expenses are $3,895,000. Last year, they were $3,883,000. So overall, generally consistent. When you look at the expenses, a bit of an increase with respect to wages and benefits. Materials are down a bit. Contracted services are the same or close. Transfers represent transfers to things like the DSAB, to the long-term care home, to the health unit. And then amortization expense, which is that depreciation component as well. So council, I talked about your financial statements and what they say. And if you go to the statement of operations at the bottom, you can see that you had a surplus of about $161,000. Now, that once again is for accounting purposes. If you go to the next slide, this is what your actual surplus is based on how you budget. So what you start with is you start with the statement of operations. So I'll just talk to 2022. You had a surplus of about $161,000. Now, in that surplus is the deduction for amortization that you don't budget for. So we add it back because it's an expense you don't budget for. So it reduces your surplus. Similarly, the change in the landfill costs, because it's an accounting adjustment and it's not budgeted for, we add that back as well, because it's an expense you don't have. What we do deduct is we deduct your actual capital expenditures, the $976,000 of stuff that you paid for, because in your budget, you budget for capital. We add back your proceeds on long-term debt. So for accounting purposes, when you issue debt, it doesn't show as a source of revenue. But because you've issued it to finance capital, you bring it in as a source of revenue. We take off the principal repayment on long-term debt because your surplus or your income statement only has the interest. So we have to deduct the principal. And then there's about $397,000 of transfers to reserves. That is a budgeted expense. So what that means is when you look at your financial statements, your surplus says one thing. Your actual surplus for budgeting purposes is about $265,000. And I say about because I'm rounding. Okay. Now, under the provisions of the Municipal Act, you need to figure out what to do with this. You can't have a surplus. So you have one of two choices. You either roll it into reserves. Actually, you have one of three choices. You either roll it into reserves, you reduce next year's levy by the surplus, or you do some combination of the two. And that's the conversation that your staff will have with you. Similarly, if you have a deficit, you have one of three choices. You either fund it through reserves, you either recover it on next year's levy, or you do some combination of both. I think the important part, council, if I may, is when you look at your financial results, and not so much 2022, but 2021, where you actually had a deficit for financial reporting purposes of $486,000. If you don't sort of hear this conversation, you may think that the municipality is spending money that they don't have and you're incurring losses. And what's important to recognize is when you do the adjustments, you actually had a surplus of $122,000. This year you had a surplus of $265,000. And council, once again, you're a $5 million organization. So what that means is you're coming in anywhere from 2 to 5% of your budget because you budget to break even. And I would suggest to you that gives me, frankly, confidence in how you budget. Because if you were missing by 20, 30% either way, and I was a counselor, my question would be, why is our budget broken? Or why isn't our budget working? The fact that you're coming in between 2% to 5% tells me that your budget's actually working pretty well. Now, you're always going to get weird examples, and with the pandemic is the perfect example. Everything hit the roof. You're always going to get unusual one-time items, but generally speaking, over the last 2 years, you've come pretty close to breaking. And the concern is if you're running up big surpluses, are you charging too much in taxes? If you're running up big deficits, are you actually going to be sustainable? Or do you have to cut? And for what it's worth, council, I don't see that. So your worship, members of council, that is a presentation concerning our audit findings. and financial statements. I'd like to thank you once again for allowing us the opportunity to be here. It's both a privilege and a pleasure to serve as the municipality's audits. If there are any questions, more than happy to answer.
Anyone?
Me? No, I already asked the question I had.
You ask, pension that too.
Well, yeah. Well, there were a couple that I was going through earlier. Let's see. I had written some down because I read it earlier. We do during our morning coffee when we get these big bundles. Okay, you explained the annual surplus, the accumulated surplus, right? Line 4 revenues. What is line 4? Other. Oh yeah, you explained that too. Okay, I'm good.
And if there are no other questions, these indicators of financial performance, we're going to look at those.
Yep.
Okay. Now, first of all, do we see a motion for the audited financial statement?
I would suggest, your worship, that would be appropriate.
Okay, so we'll do that and then we'll do the indicators. So if there are no more questions and we're satisfied with our financial statements, and Oscar, I'm quite pleased. Everything looks good and we've gone over it, and I don't think there's any other questions. So I need a mover and a seconder, Councillor Kirky and Councillor Foot. So it's number R 2023-57, moved by Councillor Kirky, seconded by Councillor Foot, that we adopt the 2022 audited financial statement as presented. All in favor? Carried. Okay. And I think we just received this tonight. Is that right, Chris?
Right.
So, and again, whenever we do this, it's always a question of how do we compare to other places, high, low, otherwise. So these are comparatives. And I'll just give it back to you, Oscar, and anything that you want to go over.
Yep.
You don't necessarily have to do it all, but the high points.
So, your worship, if I may, I was under the impression we got this last week.
I just got that the other day. You sent me the other ones, but I just got this one the other day.
Okay. So I am happy to come back if you'd like to have this conversation after you've had a chance to review it. So I can walk through it basically very briefly and give you the high points, but once council's had an opportunity to digest, I'm more than happy to come back if you'd like to have a conversation.
Okay,
Okay, so there is, maybe if you could just put it up on the screen, just so we can walk through it very quickly.
This one?
So maybe if you could move to the next slide, please. So council, just for your information, particularly for those that are new, one of the things that we do from a value added perspective is we run some benchmarking on the Township of Nipissing against peer municipalities or comparative municipalities. And what this is really intended to do is to give you some perspective as to how you fare compared to other municipalities that are in similar circumstances. So when you look at the indicators, the body that sets the accounting rules for municipalities and for governments in general say that you should look at three things. The first one is sustainability, and it's the ability of the municipality to continue to do what you're doing. The second thing that you look at is flexibility, and I call flexibility rolling with the punches. It's the ability to deal with unexpected revenue losses or unexpected expenses And how well can you absorb those pressures before you have to run out of money, cut services, what have you. And then the third perspective is vulnerability. And this is the extent to which you're reliant on funding sources you don't control. Because if that's the case, then you're at the whim of the feds or the province, whomever. So these are the indicators that we look at. And maybe if you could just flip to the next slide, please. So there's 12 indicators that are included in this document that cover sustainability, flexibility, and vulnerability. And this is where we've sort of highlighted what they are. Now, next slide, please. So from a comparative perspective, what we've tried to do is we've tried to find municipalities that are comparable to you. And generally speaking, there's three things that we've looked. We look for municipalities that have comparable numbers of households. So that is our measure. So we don't look at per capita because depending on how the census data works, if you've got seasonal residents, they don't count in your numbers. The other way that I explain it is on my street, the garbage truck stops at every house. Whether there's 3 people living in the house, 12 people living in the house, or 2 people living in the house, they're stopping at the house. The second thing we look for is we look for municipalities that are single tier. So where you don't have a county above you, for example. And so what this means is you got to be in Northern Ontario because single counties exist all over Southern Ontario. So you need to make sure that you have the right jurisdictional mix because otherwise what happens is you make bad comparators. And just for council's information, I'm from Sudbury. And so what's interesting is the people in the newspaper always compare Sudbury to Barrie. And that's a bad example because Barrie is a lower tier, Sudbury is a single tier. So what that means is things like social services, things like long-term care, the city of Barrie isn't responsible for delivering it, it's the county of Simcoe. So it's a bad comparison. Now, the third thing we look for is we look for Northern Ontario because there are single tier municipalities in the south, but they don't have DSATs. And so because of that, the services are different as well. So you need to make sure that you're close from a comparative perspective because council, there's 444 municipalities in the province of Ontario. Depending on which one I pick, I can make you look the best or the worst. So those are the comparators we use. So what you can see is that included in the analysis are 7 municipalities, including Nipissing. Some are from the neighborhood, some are from Parry Sound, and some like Central Manitoulin basically show up on the basis that they're comparable from that perspective. So in terms of reading the report, this is a bit of a different format than what council would have seen in the past. But the next section deals with financial trends. So maybe if you could just skate through. I'm going to do this very quickly. There's 5-year trends with respect to your financial performance. You can just keep moving through. There's breakdowns compared to the other municipalities in terms of the balance sheets. You can just keep moving. It's fairly self-explanatory. But if you go to this slide right here, this is where the benchmarking happens. And so what you'll find is this one, for example, compares your financial assets to your financial liabilities. And this is a measure of your sustainability because what this does is it talks about how much you have in assets versus how much you have in liabilities, and do you have more liabilities than assets. And what you can see here is that your ratio is 1.7, which means that for every dollar of liability you have $1.7 of financial assets. So from a solvency perspective, it's better than being the opposite, where you have more liabilities than assets. What you can see is that the trend has been coming downward over the last 3 years. That's the bottom graph. That's because you've been issuing debt for capital. So the issue when you issue debt for capital is the debt increases your financial liability, but the asset, because it's infrastructure, isn't a financial asset. So it's important, council, to understand this tells you the what, you need to understand the why. So there's a number of indicators that we provided. I just want to flag 2 if I may. So if you go over to the next slide, please. One of the questions we often get asked is, what's the right amount to have in reserves? And I'm not trying to be flippant when I say this, but based on infrastructure deficits, you never really have enough in reserves. But this is reserves and reserve funds per house. And so this is a measure that speaks really to flexibility and sustainability, because reserves are the war chest that you could do to sort of absorb hits and to keep things going. What you'll find is that on a per household basis, you've got about $2,500 in reserves and reserve funds. That is about middle of the road for the municipalities. So you're not overly high, you're not overly low. So that is a pretty good place to be. So now, if I may, I'm just going to skip very quickly to another one. So if you can go, keep going, keep going, keep going, stop. Sorry. Back. This is your residential taxes per house. So oftentimes, council, what we find, particularly around budget time, is there's always the question of affordability. And so what we do and what we run here is residential taxes per household to get some sense as to what your residents are paying on average and how does that compare to other municipalities. If you were on the high end of the range, I would suggest to you concerns over affordability could be valid. If you were on the low end of the range, what I would tell you with a straight face is you're not charging enough in taxes. And where we found this particularly, and this is public, the town of Smooth Rock Falls on Highway 11 had a Tembec craft paper mill. It used to pay 20% of the municipal budget. It didn't pay 20% of the taxes. It paid 20% of the budget. And so they were flush with cash. And what you discovered was in 2006, when the mill closed and they lost all that revenue, they did some soul searching to look at their financial results. And what they quickly discovered was they were charging an average household $600 for taxes, while the municipality next door was charging $1,200. And what they were doing was they were using Tembec to subsidize their tax bills. So they bit the bullet and actually brought their taxes up, because there's value to the services that the municipalities provide. So when we look at your positioning now, you're basically middle of the pack. And so what I would suggest to you, council, is from an overall perspective, we don't see signs of an affordability concern in the township. Now, there will always be people who have affordability concerns, because when you talk about average, you pull everybody in. There's always people that are on the outliers, right? People with limited income, people with fixed income, seniors, for example, people on social assistance programs. Those people will have affordability issues, notwithstanding what our analysis says. What you'll also find is there will be people who spend more on their cell phones than they pay in their taxes, right? So the secret is to, what I would suggest to council is you go for the municipality as a whole, you make your decisions based on your corporate needs. And if you have concerns about affordability, you address those specifically. If you turn around and say to me, for example, Oscar, I have concerns about affordability, we're going to 0% taxes. What I would suggest to you is what you're doing is you're treating 90% of the municipality the same way you would treat the 10% with the affordability. If you were on the high end, council, this would be a very different discussion.
We have taxes in arrears about 5%.
Taxes receivable of about 5%.
So that would tell me that we're kind of middle of the road. We don't have people hurting to pay their taxes like a lot of communities.
Through you, your worship, I would suggest to you that your tax arrears are actually low. They're low in comparison to other municipalities.
So that's what I mean, like our tax base,
Yeah.
We aren't overtaxing.
I would suggest that's not the case. Now, I'm sure I could find somebody on the street who would tell me I'm wrong, right? And I'm not trying to be flippant here, because for some people there may be a challenge. I'm just saying, council, we don't see it persuasive across the municipality, right? And it's an issue these times. And so I want to make this very clear. It's not our place to dictate policy to the municipality. Council, you call the shots. It's just what we see from a budget perspective is people are struggling with inflation. And the concept of council is trying to push 5 to 6% levy increases through because inflation, and people saying we can't afford that. Right, so it's important to consider all of these factors. What I would suggest to you, council, is we don't see signs of an affordability issue. Are there people that may be struggling? Absolutely. But we don't see it persuasive. Other municipalities where the taxes are exceptionally high, where we say, you know what, you are an outlier. The question is, can you afford these service levels? Do you have affordability concerns? Are you being as efficient as you can? But we don't see that. And once again, somebody may stop me in the parking lot and tell me I'm wrong. So council, the remainder of the document has the indicators as well. Some are operating, some are capital, some relate to debt, some relate to operating expenses as well. What I would suggest to you, council, is based on what we've seen, there's nothing that I've identified through a review of this that I would say causes concern. I think when we look at your financial results, when we look at your financial position, when we look at the indicators, I would say that from a decision-making perspective, things are pretty solid. I do want to caution council, we use financial information return data, so we're a year behind. So what that means is this is 2021, not 2022. So when you look at this information, it will refer to a $500,000 deficit. That's off of last year's statements. The other comment that I'll make, council, and I will apologize for this, I didn't write the template. I don't know how to change city to township. So when you see the report and it refers to the city, that's because my technology skills are limited and I couldn't figure out how to. So your worship, once again, apologize for this coming in table dropping. If council wants to review this and have me back to answer any questions, I am more than happy to come back and have one.
Okay, and I've gone through this. I was lucky enough to get it yesterday, so I had no questions, but, well, I only had one, and it was on the very last page, net book value of tangible capital assets to historical cost. And it was explained to me that you want to just look at this? And we were the second highest, but that's a good thing.
That is a good.
Okay,
So what this represents, your worship, is how quickly are you refreshing your assets? So we talked about amortization. So net book value is your cost net of amortization, and then there's your cost. And if you're amortizing and you're not replacing, this percentage is going to be low. And so what you'll find is you're the second highest. So what you're doing is you're actually doing a good job of refreshing your assets. These are the investments that you're continuing to make in terms of replacing it. Now, it's important to recognize that this is impacted by replacement costing. So how old is this building?
1981.
This building is on your books in $1981. Right? So it's on the books for 200 grand or whatever the number is. To replace it, 4 million, call it, right? But at the end of the day, historical cost is limited, but this is still a good measure. Where it falls below 50%, what that means is your assets are aging faster than you're replacing them. When it's above 50%, what that means is you're doing a good job replacing them and you're accounting for replacement costing as well. So at 57.75%, you're doing well.
thank you. That was the only question I had.
Okay, sorry.
Was there any other, were there any questions, Chris, that you had? In that case, on behalf of myself and council, thank you, Oscar, as usual. And if we do have questions on the indicators of financial performance, we'll invite you back on a summary day when it's light on the way and on the way home. And if not, thank you again for
Thank you,
everything.
Your Worship.
We appreciate it.
I will say, it is very nice to be here in person. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity.
It's really well done, Oscar.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I get to do this again at 8:30 and I got certain goals.
Tonight, well, you're working your way home.
Well, good luck when you sniff some.
Perfect.
West,
Thank you. West.
West Nipissing.
Yes,
Yeah.
everything. Yes,
To get back to 11. I just keep going.
that's right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
There's one more,
Johnny.
Watch for deer, Oscar. I will.
Can you hear us, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, you're good.
Moving on. We're at number 6. We haven't met. This is Tim McBride from Pinchin. And Tim, can you hear us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, welcome to our council meeting. And hopefully you'll be able to give us the landfill monitoring reports and we'll go on from there. So I will give you the floor. And we have, I believe everybody has your 2 reports.
The executive summary, these are the full reports, but I
Okay.
didn't send out all of it.
We have the executive summaries and we'll let you take it from there then.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it all right with if I share my screen and I have the presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
Whatever the package as well.
So
Okay,
you should have access now.
it's the green one.
Yes.
That's correct. Yeah. All right, let me know if you guys can see that.
No, we
Not yet,
can't.
it's black.
Okay. So
We have
yeah,
it.
so you have it?
We have the presentation loaded on the computer here, if that's easier for you, Tim.
It may be, yeah. I can just tell you when I'm going from page to page if that works best. So, so thanks for having me here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. It's our first year working with the municipality on the landfill sites. So again, we really appreciate that opportunity, and we've enjoyed it working with the staff on this so far. So the purpose of the presentation tonight is to go through the 2022 waste disposal site monitoring programs. We're going to go through a really high level, the groundwater quality, or the water quality monitoring results. We're going to spend a little time focusing on the implications of the waste capacity assessments that we've completed, because there is some discrepancies from previous work, and that has a direct implication on the closure and post-closure liability estimates, because a lot of that is driven by the remaining lifespan that you have. So given that there's changes in our estimates of remaining life, that affects our estimates for closure and post-closure liabilities. So first slide is an introduction. Myself, I'm Tim McBride. I'm the practice specialist for hydrogeology. I'm the director for Northern Ontario for Pinchin. I'm also the director for municipal and landfill services. My counterpart, Alana Valley, is a brilliant young lady. She focuses, I would say 90% of her time, and I'm probably cutting her short, on landfill and waste management projects. So she's not the typical engineer who one day is designing a culvert and the next day is doing a landfill. So Alana and her team and myself, we really do focus on landfill and landfill services. And we're very familiar with the regulations and the standards and that sort of thing. So we're bringing a fresh set of eyes to your landfill sites and providing some insight and some opportunities into how things could be done a little bit different and that sort of thing. So in summary, so we're going to talk about Bear Creek. We'll talk about the current program. We'll talk about the results for this past year. We'll talk about any recommendations we have for next year's program. And again, like I said, we'll talk about the remaining site capacity. Wolf Lake, exactly the same agenda. We're going to talk about those same 4 items. At the end, I'm going to wrap it all up together, and we'll talk about the post-closure and closure liability estimates for these sites as well. So Bear Creek, current monitoring program consists of 6 wells and 6 surface water monitoring locations. All the wells were observed to be in good condition. No major adjustments, modifications are required, except 2 wells are either been subject to the casing has sunk a little bit, or alternatively the PVC pipe has been jacked out of the ground by frost heaving. Either way, those just need to be cut and then resurveyed, or someone just needs to measure how much we cut off to make that adjustment, so those things can be closed and lockable again. And then 1 other well has a broken lid. So when I put this presentation together, I don't even remember. Alana would have to jump in. I don't remember if we've been awarded the contract for next year or not, but these are some things that your consultant will have to do in order to make sure you're in compliance with Regulation 903, which is specific to monitoring wells. I apologize for this figure. I thought it would look a lot prettier, but you can get the gist of it here. This is the Bear Creek site, the landfill itself. Our group thought it was a very tidy operation, which I'm very pleased to see. Sometimes we go to these landfill sites and, no pun intended, they're a dump. But this one here was really nice. Your monitoring well network is focused here to the east. And then you have 1 other monitoring well. There's a little blue and white checkered dots. That shows you what the spatial extent of the monitoring well network is. And you can see a couple surface water monitoring stations in this one photo as well. Those are the yellow triangles. So if we go to the next slide, this is the Bear Creek Waste Disposal Site surface water monitoring locations. So you can see it's pretty extensive. It goes a long ways out into that wetland. So it gives us an idea of what potential effects the landfill is having on the receiving water body, which is that wetland. Just for everyone's knowledge, I know wetlands are great for attenuating contaminants and that sort of thing, but the ministry's opinion approach is that nobody owns surface water. So even if your property line was out into that wetland, you can't have impacts in the surface water. So that's why we need to monitor it very, very closely, make sure that any leachate derived impacts are not having an effect on the surface water features. All right, so the 2022 results, we did not identify anything significant that was a landfill derived impact. The groundwater is in compliance with the trigger level monitoring program. So the trigger level monitoring program is based on what we call guideline B7, and guideline B7 is very, very stringent. It's based on the drinking water standards, but only a fraction of it. You're only allowed to impact up to a fraction of the drinking water standards. So for example, if your limit for iron was 0.3 in a drinking water standard, 0.3 milligrams per liter, you would only be allowed to get up to 50% of that. So like I said, it's very, very stringent, and I'm happy to say that we didn't have any issues that were landfill derived. Now there is some background stuff there that we have to consider, but nothing to make us think that the landfill is not operating as designed. We also sample and monitor for landfill gas. As you know, methane generation from landfills can be an explosive gas. So we test for that to make sure that there's no buildup of landfill gas in the subsurface, and all of our detections there were non-detect. So definitely well below the explosive limit for methane, and certainly well below the Ontario Regulation 232 standards. So we're good there. Surface water monitoring results are consistent with those of previous years. It's really important to look at from year to year, especially when you're looking at surface water and wetlands, because there's all kinds of processes that naturally occur in the wetlands. So you will see seasonal spikes, you will see different things, and if you're not careful, you can't just say, oh, we have phosphorus exceedance. Oh yeah, that's landfill derived, because you will see seasonal spikes in certain parameters. So it's really important to track that from year to year and do what we call a trend analysis. So yeah, all the reporting concentrations from the down gradient monitoring wells, these are the ones that are closest to the wetland. They all met the guideline B7 trigger concentrations, except for iron in both locations and total dissolved solids in one location during both events. So iron is often naturally elevated in Northern Ontario. So we don't consider that to be a landfill derived effect that's significant or worth worrying ourselves about. And total dissolved solids, again, at one well it was elevated, but in the other wells in the network, it was back down to normal levels. So it seems to be working well as a natural attenuation type landfill, where yes, we understand there's going to be rainfall that percolates through the garbage and it is going to generate leachate, but as that plume continues to move through the groundwater cycle to the receivers, nature takes its course, and there's a lot of different hydrogeological processes that take place in the sand and gravel aquifer that, for lack of a better word, filter it out. So the above noted exceedances are not interpreted to present a significant risk to the environment or health or human health or safety or anything like that. So we're happy with Bear Creek. Recommendations for next year. I'm not going to ask you guys to do anything different. I think we just continue on with the groundwater, surface water, and gas program as per the license for the landfill. So I think the Ministry of the Environment will agree with us. Like, we're not asking for anything different, and we're not asking to cut anything back. We think we should repair those wells that need to be cut so they can be properly closed and locked. And this one casing, BH404, requires some casing repairs. And then our last recommendation, one that's pretty important, and you guys do it anyways, is we think that you should conduct regular annual topographic surveys of the site so that you can gain a good understanding of what the waste deposition rate is, or disposal rate for the site, so that you can get accurate estimates of contaminating or site life, sorry. So yeah, I think as per the contract, you guys were asking those surveys to be done every fall anyways. So we would recommend you continue on with that in order that we can, really pinpoint what the remaining lifespan of the, of the site is. So that's Bear Creek. Oh, sorry. And here's the capacity component. So in 2021, it was determined that there's about 15,000 cubic meters of material there, left remaining, airspace remaining. So what we did was we looked at the 2021 survey and we looked at the 2022 survey that my crew did. And between those two, we had a volumetric difference of 2,850 meters roughly. So, if we look at their, the remaining capacity of about 12,422 cubic meters, at that fill rate, you'd end up with a remaining lifespan for this site of about 4 years. So I know that's considerably less than what your previous consultant found, and there are things that can affect this. So obviously, if you guys had a big demolition project and you tore down a school or a big building and all that demolition waste went into your site, that could bias your waste disposal rate and then cut your lifespan. But in discussions with staff, it's my understanding those types of projects did not occur this year, and this is just your standard year, and this is the kind of waste deposition rate that you have to deal with. So in that respect, I'm pretty confident in the number that we got. But again, as we continue to do surveys from year to year, we can, rather than using like a 1 year number, what we usually do is start to build a data set, and we work with a 5 year average, 5 year moving average, and we figure out like, well, how much do you have left? So anyways, this site here is only got about 4 years left, and being that close to closure, it really affects your liability estimates. So I'll get to that a little bit later on. So that's it for Bear Creek. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take it now, or we can wait till the end.
I think if you don't mind, we'll take them all at the end after we see about Wolf Lake.
Yeah, okay, excellent, thank you. I am on a roll, so let's just keep going. Wolf Lake current monitoring network is 10 monitoring wells, 3 surface water stations. Similar issues with the wells there, just some PVC pipes that have jacked out of the ground, need to be trimmed up, and other than that, everything looks like it's in good condition. All the pipes are solid, good superficial seals, so it's not like puddles or any surface water can get down the annular space and affect the groundwater quality. So that's all good. This is the next slide is the site plan and the monitoring well locations. So you can see here where the surface water monitoring locations are, but also all the monitoring wells. So there's 10 wells for this site, which is quite a lot of wells for such a small site. So I think the network is very, very comprehensive, and that investment has already been made now. So I hope with how comprehensive this network is, it'd be a very long time before anyone comes to us from the ministry or anybody and says, hey, you need to put more wells in to better characterize this site. I feel like we have a pretty good understanding of what's going on this site. So results for this year for Wolf Lake is, there is a measurable impact in the immediate vicinity of the fill area, which is what we would expect. That's, the process that I talked about. As water filters through the garbage, you're going to have leachate generation, but then it naturally attenuates as you move further down gradient from the source. And you see a little bit of, you still see a little bit of impact at BH 1111 and BH 1211, but they're quickly approaching background concentration. So the site's continuing to work as designed as a natural attenuation site. We're very happy with that again. We don't see any surface water quality issues in any of the receivers around the Wolf Lake site. So yeah, the concentrations and water quality we see is not a threat to aquatic life, which is a very high standard. So we're happy with performance. So on this site, we do have a barium exceedance at BH 1111, and we also have iron and manganese at BH 11 and BH 12. So iron and manganese, again, they're common throughout Northern Ontario. I'm not really that worked up about them, and I don't consider any of these guideline V7 exceedances to be significant at this time, as they're not health related. We are going to continue to watch the barium. Barium's a good tracer for landfill performance, as is chloride. So we typically watch chloride for general chemistry type parameters, and barium is a good tracer for, hey, if you start to see barium, sometimes you have other metals rear their head. So it's important for us to watch those carefully. Similar to Bear Creek, we did the landfill gas work again with a 4-channel gas monitor, and there was no explosive concentrations of methane found at this site either. So recommendations for the following year. We just want to stick with the status quo, do what's required by the license, nothing less, nothing more. Fix up those little well casings that need some trimming. And as I spoke to before, invest in the asset that is the landfill through topographic surveys so we know how quickly we're eating up the asset. So the Wolf Lake, oh my goodness, all over here. So the Wolf Lake capacity, in 2021, it was assumed that there was approximately 44,000 remaining capacity. We looked at this, we did the same process here. We looked at the 2021 survey versus our 2022 survey, and it indicated that we received about 2,400 cubic meters of waste in that one calendar year. So based on that deposition rate and what's remaining in the site, we have about 41,990 cubic meters. That equates to 17 and a half years remaining. Now, I have to be careful with this, and I gotta frame this. We've done these waste capacity estimates separately, right? So if you have the Bear Creek site and it's only got 4 years left and it takes about 2,800 cubic meters of garbage a year, well, in 4 years from now, if that site would have to be closed, that 2,800 would also have to come to Wolf Lake, which would quickly eat into that 17 years, right? Because at that point in time, we'd be bringing in about 5,000 cubic meters a year. So it's important to realize that even though, we think, okay, we have 4 years left at Bear and we've got 17 left at Wolf, really, you have to look at the community as a whole and how much waste generation there is and where does it go. Because yeah, once Bear is closed, if we assume everything has to go to Wolf at that point in time, that lifespan is going to get shorter really, really fast. So, so take this 17 and a half years with a grain of salt, because it is dependent on the other site being open. So yeah, as I spoke to, the next slide, the next slide we have speaks about the closure and post-closure liability estimates. So for Bear Creek, because we're so close to the closure, like we're only 4 years away, it requires us to kind of have the money in the bank to do the closure. So closure is, you have to grade all the garbage at 4-to-1 slopes and a 20-to-1 crown. And then you have to cap all that with a minimum of 2 feet of clay or low permeable soil. And then you have to have 6 inches of topsoil. And then you have to have hydroseeded or vegetated cover on top of it. So that's a lot. There's a lot of money, a lot of earthworks that goes into that. And then on top of all that, there's a 25-year post-closure monitoring period that's required. So even once the landfill is closed, you still have to sample all those wells for 25 years and make sure that the closed landfill is not having an impact. So yeah, in 2021, the township carried an estimate of $500,000 for closure of this site. Based on the capacity and where we're at and the current interest rates, which are all published by the MOE, they give us the numbers we have to use and the discount rate. The new liability estimate for this site is $850,000. So there's a change in liability of about $350,000 for the Bear Creek site. So when we go to the Wolf Lake site, same sort of scenario. We have an approved volume of 54,000. We've only got about 15,000 in there so far. So we have about 40,000 capacity left. So we come up with the 17 years. So this, it's hard to explain. It's almost like this cost is amortized over the life of the landfill though, right? So because this site, the closure date is so much farther out, we don't have to have as much money like on hand today for the liability. So this one here though, there was $1 million set aside for it in 2021. But when we do the calculations in accordance with the Public Sector Accounting Board regulation 3280, when we follow that process, the factorized expenditure that we need to have based on how much capacity of the landfill we've already used is only $400,000. So the change in liability on this site actually goes down by about $600,000. So, having said all of that, we get to the last slide here, which is kind of a summary. So you can see the estimates of liability from 2021. There was a total, reserve, let's call it, of $1.5 million. So based on the numbers that Alana ran this year, we came up with an estimate of about 1.25 million. So the liability is actually going to go down by about $250,000 compared to the estimates from last year, which I think is positive. But I know there's some other pieces of this presentation that are alarming and maybe not so positive. So I'll close on that. And at this point, if you guys have any questions, I'm more than happy to do that. I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can see who's speaking with me, and that way we can have a more productive conversation too.
Okay. So questions, and I'll open it to the floor. I mean, I know the first question everybody has is, what can we do to extend the life of Bear Creek? Is there, and the one suggestion was possibly expand the landfill. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, there's definitely options to expand, the landfill. We have to be careful though, like there's certain triggers through landfill expansion that would trigger a full EA process. So that can be a very, very long and lengthy thing. Like I think I started the, I don't feel like I'm telling tales out of school here. I started the EA process for New Liskard in 2015. And that site just received minister approval last year. So it takes a long time to get through. Expansion of an existing landfill, depending on how you do it. If you build on top of the existing garbage, you're not overprinting anything else. So you don't have to worry about the bugs and the bunnies and the species at risk and archaeological issues and those types of things, right? All those items are studies that would have to be addressed in order to get this through if we did trigger a provincial EA. So things that trigger a provincial EA would be if you were to ask for an expansion of more than 100,000 cubic meters total, right? So I think the one site, I can't remember which one here. Let me just check the volumes real quick, if you don't mind. So yeah. Oops. Yeah, so Bear has another 15,000. Alana, do you know what the total capacity of Bear is? Like what the approved capacity is?
I don't think we were able to determine that this year based on the previous consultants' reports.
Yeah. So I think the assumption we made and the assumption that was made previously was that Bear Creek was approved as a small waste disposal site. And those are defined as having a maximum volume of 40,000 cubic meters. So if we assume that Bear Creek's maximum volume as approved today is 40,000, if we were to take it to 100,000, or let's say we went to 101,000, that would trigger an EA. So we'd want to stay under that 100. The other trigger though is you can't more than double your existing capacity. So really, the most we could do at Bear Creek is ask for an expansion to say 79,000, and that way we could avoid those two EA triggers. So there are options there, and like I said, if you can't go back to them more than once, so you can't say, hey, I want I want 39,000 now, and I want another 39,000 in 5 years, and I want another, like, you only get one shot at this. And if you want to go beyond that, you are going to trigger an EA. So, and it's not like the EA is not a bad process. It really is just a planning tool, but it takes a very, very long time to get all the supporting studies done, because you have to do bird surveys. You can only do those at certain times of the year. You have to do turtle surveys. Again, they're very seasonal dependent studies. And if you miss that window in any given year, you're waiting all the way to next year before you can get that data they are quite an involved process. So yeah, the short answer is yeah, there are options for Bear Creek.
And it's at 40,000 now, and it's been operating for quite a number of years. So if we went another 39,000 and almost double the capacity, how many years? Again, you can't tell how many years unless you just look at 2,800, whatever the fill rate, annual fill rate of 2,850 into 39.
Yeah. That gives you another 13 and a half years, let's say.
Plus the 4 we have now.
That's correct. Plus the 4 you have now.
I'm gonna be dead. So I think that might be something that we would be interested in. That's something we're gonna have to talk about as a council for sure. But I just wanted some clarity on that. That was my question. Does anybody else? I'm sure you have questions. If you want to ask Mr. McBride.
We're not at 40,000 yet, though. We've got 12,000 more to go, right? To get to 40.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
And that's based on the fill rate
yeah,
from last year.
Yeah.
So if we come up with some ideas
Yeah.
to
To cut
lower
it
that.
back.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but based on that figure, and we say we have 17 and a half years left at Wolf Lake, but we have roughly 4 years left at Bear Creek. So we'll take that figure off the top, but we add that to the cubic meters that are currently going into Wolf Lake. So that would reduce our 17 and a half years to about 10 years. Am I correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And can we expand Wolf Lake as well?
Yeah, the problem that we might have with Bear is just the proximity to that wetland, right? So
Yeah.
I think Wolf might actually be the easier of the two to expand, but maybe some of you that are more familiar with the area would know better than me, but it seems like we have a little bit more real estate there before we get to any surface water features, like any significant surface water features.
Yeah.
Good to do them both, do the EA at Wolf Lake and go for more, go for the 100 or 150,000 and wait. Do Bear Creek, how we suggested, and get it done.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
so could we do an expansion on both?
Yeah, you could. There's no reason why you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So with the budget, we're looking at doing Bear Creek immediately,
Yeah.
starting
Oh,
the
yeah.
process. And then after that, working on local.
Yeah, so we don't have to do them both at the same time, do we?
No.
No.
No, but if you did Wolf Lake and went for the EA study and went for a
The
big amount,
expansion?
we've got a lot of property there. And go let him, as he explained, it might take 7 years. Well, we've got time at Wolf Lake, but we don't have Bear Creek. So if we get Bear Creek done, this
give
way,
us
go
our
for the
buffer zone
39.
To get
Yes,
going.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's lots of different ways for you guys to attack this. I mean, definitely, I think the easiest way at Bear is try to get a little 40,000 expansion. And then, yeah, if you wanted to pursue a full EA for the other site, and at that point, you could do whatever you want, right? If what I would recommend at that point in time is we would assume that Bear would be closed, and all the waste is going to go to Wolf, and then what we would ask for from the ministry through that EA process is for a 30-year planning period, which is the most that they will approve. So we would say, okay, you know, we assume that we're going to make 5,000 cubic meters of waste per year. Plus, you got to put daily cover on it now and make sure that, you know, I put a bulking factor in that so that we have some operational stuff that we can put down so that we don't have, you know, birds and windblown litter and that sort of thing. Plus, if there's projections for increase in population, we could also factor that in and say, okay, well, yeah, right now we're at 5,000, but if our population in 10 years is going to be, you know, 10% higher, well, we can use that as justification to ask for a higher waste generation rate as well. So yeah, at that point in time, there's no ceiling to it. The next ceiling is 1 million, right? So I think if you're going to go through the EA process and you're going to do an ask, yeah, like ask for 300,000, right?
Yeah.
Because at that point, if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the cost between 100,000 and 300,000 is no different because the EA is what's going to cost, right?
That's right. That's right. Because you have to do the archaeological study, you have to do the traffic study, you have to do the, you know, the noise and the dust study. Like, regardless if it's 100,000 or it's 300, you're doing the studies. So.
Are there any other questions? I think that's all valuable information that, you know, we'll look at. We put some money aside this year in the budget to start the process, and then council will discuss it, and then we'll get back to Tim and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Unless there are more questions. Okay, Tim, I want to thank you. That was quite informative and more positive than I expected, because it does sound like we do have some options, and we'll certainly be in touch as a council when we need more information and go ahead to make this decision.
That would be great. Yeah, no, and if at any point in time you need any additional information, please feel free to reach out to myself or Alana, and yeah, we'll help you in whatever way we can.
Okay, well, thank you very much and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye now.
Okay.
Options.
Okay, before we move on, we have just a motion to accept the water quality monitoring reports, and that we authorize the recommended repairs to the wells of both landfill sites as presented. Councillor Yam and Councillor Foote. Thank you. It's number R 2023-58, moved by Councillor Yam, seconded by Councillor Foote, that we receive the final 2022 annual water quality monitoring reports for the Bear Creek landfill and Wolf Lake landfill from Pynchon as presented, and that we authorize the recommended repairs to the wells at both landfill sites as presented. All in favor? So, landfill waste reduction strategies and programs, just a discussion. And Chris and Dan and the people from Pinchin have all pinched in. And there's some recommendations and we will have some as a body. This isn't anything that we're gonna adopt tonight, but we're gonna talk it over and go from there. So Chris,
Well, previously, a couple of years ago, we started putting together some options, and we just want to make sure that we're going in the right direction that council would like. So I found a report actually from Councillor Yim from 2011 that recommended a 2-bag limit for garbage. And we had recommended that to council a couple of years ago. And I believe Dan spoke to someone who used to work with the Ministry of the Environment.
Yeah, she's gonna look
And they
after the
recommended
dumps here. And yeah, North Bay has gone down to, the biggest drop in their landfill consumption is they've lowered how many bags you can take into North Bay, and it's huge. It forces people to recycle more. That's what it comes down to. They came up with the same numbers as we did, or we got the same numbers then. It was 50% recycling still left in garbage bags. When we did that little survey not too long ago, they did the same. Well, they did it first, and it was 50%, 60% of recycling still left in garbage bags that, you can take that out of the landfills, it could be recycled. So now we could go from 2,800 to half just by a bag restriction.
and that could go from 4 to 8 years,
Right.
which would make a big difference.
So that's 2 bags a week?
Yep.
And that's per household. So we also had different limits that we were looking at for vacant land would have a few bags per year, maybe 25. For the resort, we would look at per cottage or per resident. So with respect to us having different facilities that we would have to look at, so commercial would have more as well.
Winter ice shack outfitters.
Pardon?
Winter ice shack outfitters, just throwing that out there.
That's something special that we would have to look at, because if we
Well, and,
we don't look at that, so
we should.
yes.
The only issue that I run into with those is some of them aren't even residents of our township. So, do they, they're not gonna be afforded the same, they're not gonna be able to use the dump or the landfill, as I'm often corrected.
Well, my argument on that is there's not a whole lot of recycling occurring there. It all goes in the bag and it all goes in the back of the truck and it all goes straight to the dump. I was out ice fishing last week or week before. I know fitters coming off the ice, like after the weekend, they generate a pile of garbage. And I don't think there's any of it's recycled, separated.
I agree with you, because we see it a lot, and it's people coming from outside that they see the restrictions and, we talk clear bags and they're like, what are you talking about? And they're in shock, right? So it's really that education piece, people like tourists and that kind of thing coming in, and they go, whoa, you want me to do what? Right? So, and that's when you find they're dumping at places, but I think it really is the camps or the outfitters or whatever saying, we want you, but this is what we need you to do. And it's going to be a matter of putting things in place for them.
We've had a very high response rate from the camps, from the resorts that we have. They're working within our boundaries.
Yeah.
It's more the on ice that we're having.
Well, and I'm just talking about cottages too, right? And that kind of thing, like, because they come looking for bags and say, I can't believe I have to find a clear bag. And I can't, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Not everyone goes to dump every week. Could be someone maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
So what we're looking at,
So what we have is much like some neighboring municipalities. So you have a punch card. So you have so many bags per year. How many you use each week, each month? It equals out to 2 bags per week.
Right.
And then the punch card. And there was also a concern about a small business owner in the south end who does garbage collection. So we have different ways that they can still follow this, and we can work with them. so it won't impact their business either. So we've thought a lot about this. We've already started the work on a draft bylaw. If we decide to go that way. So a lot of the groundwork has been done. So it's just, before we go any further with preparing any items, we just want to make sure that council would like us to continue to look at that route. And also, Dan did some investigation into a compactor.
Yeah, to me, so the bottom compactor, it's a 2009, I believe, but it's only got 1,600 hours on it because it
So
was a
1990.
1990, sorry. It's only got 1,600 hours on it 'cause it's from the military. It's been refurbished. This company specializes in refurbishing them. So, I mean, a new compactor is $1 million.
This was 250,000.
Right, and it's only has, what I like about it, it has 1,600 original hours on it, so it hasn't been beat up. Things aren't shaken apart.
Looking at the other stuff that they have for sale that's been refurbished, it's the better bet.
Now, is that a straight wheel compactor or does that have, is that a fiber pack?
No, just straight wheel. None of them are, I don't think they're fiber packs.
No,
No?
but you put that wheel on garbage, you could have garbage piled to here, and when they're done,
Yeah.
you wouldn't even know there's garbage in the dump.
They got big.
Put a
steel-
little layer of sand, like 4 inches,
Yeah,
there's nothing left. Shocking.
I do have some literature I can do in that next council package is how much volume that compactor takes out of the garbage after we run over it, the recommended times.
Now, would we be floating that back and forth between the two
Would have
dumps?
to, yeah, we'd have to. I mean, our float is kind of, on the verge of taking it, but we'd have to reinforce it with plating because of those big steel paddles.
Yeah,
Nobody, the other, other float companies aren't gonna want to really move it unless we supply rubber matting and stuff like that to load on.
yeah, because of things like that, they just beat
Right.
stuff up.
Right,
So they're designed to do that.
but I mean, the best option would be to float it back and forth. I would keep it up at Bear Creek more and then float it, every 3 weeks over to Wolf Lake, because we have more room there to work the garbage.
You can spread it out more.
Yeah,
Okay.
We had a tracked excavator do that at one time.
Tracks
float.
flatten. There's no compaction value. We used to move it with it and get it to when we were having the compactor come years ago, and then spread it out in the compactor. And like you say, you never know you put garbage there.
But the thing with, see, right now I have in the summertime, I have a D6 dozer on rent, but dozers are meant to float, right? It's 25,000 pounds, but they're meant to float. They're not meant to
Yeah.
really sink into it, take the air out of the
Footprint,
bag.
PSI is very high.
Right, as with a wheel compactor, it's, the PSIs are high and it drives, those big spikes drive into the bags to deflate them.
Yeah,
I think in the long term, I mean, this seems to be the route we're gonna have to go because it'll pay for itself when you start looking at $1 million for a dump or a landfill and another million here and the closure fees.
And that's
Well,
not
I'm-
guaranteed.
We might be
I'm
able
also
to,
That's
thinking of
not
the
guaranteed if we apply for a new land.
cost of an
Right.
EA.
right, I mean, we might be able to double that 4 years if we get on the bag restriction and a compactor.
Yeah.
We could probably double that 4 years just by, working the garbage that comes in.
And as you said, we have to educate because, if people are gonna go and just throw it all in, so unfortunately, it's not gonna be pleasant for the people at the landfill, because they're gonna go, it'll be like when you go through the airport and they check every so many bags, they're gonna check a bag and go, hey, this isn't, you can't do that. People are not gonna be happy and we're all gonna get phone calls. Count on it, but
Even when we,
if we're going to expand the life of this landfill, we're gonna have to do that.
And a good way to look at it, like I was talking to Victoria Thomas, it's not it's everybody's landfill. Like, you have to look at it, everybody uses it, it's everybody's landfill, just not the townships.
Well, and everybody, nobody was really happy when we started recycling.
Oh, no.
And no one was happy when we started with clear bags, but we give it time, we give it education, and we explain the alternative and the costing. Hopefully we can
Now,
message across.
at some point, would it be in our best interest to have an open house Q&A?
Oh, public meeting
Yes.
for sure.
Absolutely.
And I have a plan on meetings coming up in the spring. I do. And an open house or an open house meeting to discuss the strategic planning initiatives for this council, as well as the future of the landfill, and one at each end of the township would be best. But later in the year, once the cottagers start to come, would be better, so we can have everybody's input would be better.
Yeah, it had to be well advertised, because I'd like to see a really good turnout for something like that.
We have a newsletter going out in April, and we'd like to put something in there.
So another option we've been kind of looking into is a incinerator. But it's not, I don't think it's gonna be a viable option. I'm talking to the ministry. Just,
Well, there's other environmental issues to go along with it.
yeah, I mean, more in Ontario than anywhere else. So,
Now, is that a disintegrator, the one that goes up to 2200F and
yeah,
burns everything?
burns everything.
They run them on the East Coast.
And
And
it's just, like, we've been talking to the people that manufacturing, the engineers, and it's Ontario, that's
yeah,
the problem.
yeah. I think Etobicoke is the only place.
Yeah, there's only one in Ontario.
I think it's in Etobicoke. But they burn, you can put a tire in, and when it's finished, there's really nothing left, there's
Yes.
nothing there. That's,
And that's why we were looking into it,
Yeah.
because not only just for our township, but many townships and municipalities around us are running out of space. This isn't an unlimited option.
well, you could get them all together, because that thing, once it's fired, needs to run.
Exactly.
And it's money in the
Yeah.
bank for from Huntsville to North Bay.
Our neighbors don't
Yeah.
even have a landfill, right?
No,
And we were taking that into consideration, but we're talking to the representative who used to work for the ministry. They were saying that it's the air testing,
Air
the
quality.
constant air quality testing that is the most expensive.
yeah,
The other plus side was you don't have to get rid of your recycling because then you need that for your fuel.
yeah,
Everything goes in.
Everything goes in.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about
yeah,
recycling.
has to burn, has to keep burning.
But we're still talking to the company
Mhm.
and they're working on to see how, if they can swing it.
Well, maybe things will change by the time we implement different, or
Right.
extend the lives of our landfills, and then when the next staff is looking at these things, maybe they can.
Yeah, it'll all change as soon as we get the EEA on Wolf Lake and get it up and running.
Yeah,
So they have to run on natural gas or propane or?
Okay.
Diesel or propane, because we don't have natural gas. Those are the
That'd be-
options. I've talked to them on it.
Pretty expensive to run on propane.
Yeah, but the propane or
Cheaper to get
diesel,
a natural gas lamp put in than.
oh, it'd be more expensive to bring that line in.
All of it is expensive, and that's why we were thinking outside the box,
Yeah.
and we continue to accept any
Well, for-
and if
recommendations.
you partnered up with our neighbors surrounding, Quasin has natural gas,
Callender.
Callender has natural gas, like it's out there, doesn't
So-
necessarily have to be built
Doesn't
here.
have to be here.
No.
And it can all
We
be
could
trucked.
partner with,
You can make hydro with it, you can, there's so
Right.
many options
And
that,
if it
And
were,
there's so many municipalities that are gonna be looking for.
Yeah.
options.
Yeah.
right, and if we were in a tighter municipality, you could heat buildings with it.
Yeah. yeah,
You can get a steam rad that kind of, then.
oh, for heating like municipal buildings
Yeah,
or
or, you
whatever.
know, yeah, buildings, houses,
Yeah.
but I mean, we're so widespread here, if we had it.
I'm just looking at our population density map. We're the lowest
Yeah.
in our group of communities.
4.3.
Yeah.
4.3. We have elbow room.
We do. Nice. So,
So we'll let you continue on that. I think the compactors a good idea, but you'll bring this all to us, the 2-bag limit and the cards, and we'll go from there. And then we'll share that with our constituents.
The 2-bag limit would only go into effect, I believe, January 1st of next year would be the
Gives you
easiest
lots of time.
transition.
And
Yeah.
Powassan has had it for several years now. And it was so funny because I would go to the landfill in Powassan, and one counselor one day said, "How many bags you got there?" And I said, "Well, these are my son-in-laws," and whatever. And he goes, "That's $2 a bag after too, you know," and I didn't know that, so I get all the cash out and pay. So it was family taking advantage, but anyway, they've had it for years. It's just part of.
Well,
you
if
know,
we
how you-
implement a punch card system, like somebody like myself, I don't go to the dump every week.
No,
I think I was a month and I had 5 bags, you know, so it's just,
yeah, that'd only be 2 weeks, so. you know,
yeah,
with your
so if we had a
punch
punch
card-
card system, then
Yeah.
that would work.
They just punch the bags you have, but then it doesn't go by time, it just goes by bags, right? So if you go every 5 weeks and have, or 6 weeks and have 2 bags, you just punch two punches. I think it's 104, like the one we had, there's like 104 bags a year, or,
Based on that, and then rounded up.
yeah, we
There was a
rounded up
couple
to
rounded up.
120, I think.
When I lived in Chisholm, we had the bag limit that we're working with our sample. And for a family of 4, we never met our limit.
Yeah. So you could sell bag quotas.
Yeah,
And for those that are above the limit, we could charge $3 a bag, and then we could look at the outfitters and.
Yeah.
We will have to look at them. So what we'll do, we'll let you continue, and we'll.
They will have something ready for the next council meeting.
Okay. So I think we're back to number 2. And that is committee reports. And
I gotta find it.
I'll start with Counselor Yam.
I do have one. I have one, we had our museum meeting on March the 1st. Motion was passed for the new description for museum manager position, and I think Chris is gonna post it tomorrow.
Yeah, I have the position description for adoption by council
Yeah.
this evening, and then
Okay.
once that's adopted, we'll post it tomorrow.
Okay, and then we also talked about funding for students, which I know isn't available yet, but anyhow, we discussed it, and we also thought that if we don't get it for both, we can maybe hire. Doesn't necessarily have to be a student. That was discussed as well. We discussed the cataloging and the pictures. And we're gonna push to get the church done for sure this year, and some of the other, and just have it all unified. So from now on, it's all the same, no matter who's there. So Steve had talked about displaying artifacts at the library in Powassan. That's up for further discussion at later dates. Willa discussed us getting involved in a pancake breakfast later in the spring, which would be nice if we could, and kind of promote our maple syrup people, because they are the best. And we're going to revisit on June the 7th, the area museums and the Rosso Road. And the next meeting is the first Wednesday of April.
Okay, good. Any questions? Okay, Counselor Foote.
We had a rec committee meeting yesterday, so we met last night. We went through quite a few things. We had great feedback from the skate night. We had a ton of people there and people seemed to be really happy. Fireworks were amazing and lots of great comments about it. Feedback for next year was maybe extending the ice so that it goes right up to the rink shack. So that's a little bit of feedback we had. And people were looking for some hot dogs or snacks and something like that. So we'll take a look at it next year and see what we maybe can switch up a little bit, see what we can do. We talked about the spaghetti dinner. So spaghetti dinner was on Saturday that just passed. I think we had a really good turnout. We ended up with 78 adults, 10 kids, and 28 takeouts. I was shocked at how many takeouts we had. I was really surprised. So it was really kind of fun with a donation. Our biggest takeaway is we're going to come up with another container next year for the desserts, so we can separate the desserts for the, I'm not sure they want garlic in their dessert from the garlic bread. And we raised $480 to put towards whatever is needed within the benches or within the community kids programs. And that's a big part of it. We just wanted to put something aside, and it wasn't about a fundraiser. This dinner was about getting together as a community and saying hello.
It was really good. That was, yeah, it was.
Awesome. We did realize we need to put another propane burner in play next year. So we have some tweaks that have to happen in the kitchen end of it, right? So next event is Easter scavenger hunt. So plans are in place for that. April 8th, and that's going to run from 12 till 2. So we've got 3 tables going. We've got a craft table, egg decorating table, cookie decorating, and then we're going to do a scavenger hunt. And it's really going to involve families this year. So last year it was come bring your kids and we'll scavenger hunt with them. This year we're going to involve parents. So I think that'll be fun and move it. So that'll be awesome. Coming up next, and I don't have the date and I'm sorry, but is bat boxes. So
May 27th,
May 27th.
and it'll be at the museum
Yes.
to help boost museum opening.
Yeah. So James brought them to the meeting last night and they're kind of cool. So he's got them all, they're working them and they'll put them in bags for the kids, or they're putting them together somehow. Terry's gonna put it together. So you just hand that and we don't have to go searching out. Things are gonna go missing. So the cost for the kids is $15 for a bat box, which is nothing, and it would be fun for them. We have an option for younger kids. So the younger ones that maybe can't work a screwdriver or anything else, we have some options for them. We're having a birdhouse option possibly for them. So that'll be fun. Soccer's coming up, May 25th to July 6th. But I think we decided on t-shirts or a shirt option for the soccers, and registration. We'll just finish up with that. I think it's really fun because it's a jersey with the township logo on the front and then a number on the back. A little more expensive for the kids, but you can't beat. I think we said $30, right? So $30 registration, which is crazy for the season.
And
Yeah.
that's the wind up party as well.
Yeah, so that'll include their party at the end. So it's fantastic. Something we did say is once registration is closed, registration is closed. Done. Yeah.
Lesson
She's done.
That closed the issues last year.
Yes, and that posed a lot of the issue last year. So it'll be fun. Bottle drive, we did you want to add? No?
Registration opens next week.
Oh, yes, registration opens next week. So that's perfect.
Office hours.
It's office hours, so we're running May 25th to July 6th from 9 to 4, correct? 9 to 4:30? 9 to
8 to 4:30.
I'm
sorry, 9 to 4,
9 to 4,
March.
yes.
Next week, March break.
Yeah,
March break from 9
Thank
to
you.
4 will be registration.
thank you. My dates are really wrong.
And the beer bottle or the bottle drive,
$404.30 last month.
that was really good.
Yeah, hat goes off to everybody that took part in it because it was probably one of the easiest sorts I've ever done. They did a
And
really good
quickly.
job. And it went 45 minutes,
Oh, yeah.
done. Well, that didn't include collecting. It was 45 minutes on site. So the landfill people really did a really good job in helping us stay organized. It was awesome. Facebook page, we decided voted on a Facebook page for the rec committee to help that, so that'll happen. And working on a survey for everybody. So the team's working on the survey. Kristen's putting all her energy into it and getting that done and helping with that. And then Commander just wanted to make sure we knew that their spring dance is coming up April 22nd. So we can maybe take part, go out and visit them, and their yard sale and barbecue is May 20th, which will hit
Weekend.
the long weekend. So, and have some fun with that. I think that's the biggest, I think that's
That was it.
covers everything. It was a lot, it was a lot going on.
Any questions for Councillor Foot? Well, then we'll move to Councillor Kurt.
All right. Boston District Union Public Library. We had a meeting on February the 27th. We revisited our strategic plan and we'll be giving it a makeover in the coming months because it's getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and it's getting to the point where it's not really achievable anymore. So we're gonna tear it apart and start over, make it achievable so that the next 4 years it'll start to come together. We're looking at coordinating with the area libraries and museums for special events such as the Maple Syrup Festival. I may have pointed out that 90% of the maple syrup in this country comes from Nipissing. And for heritage days and special events like that. Looking at possibly changing our insurance provider, pending a cost overview, and it looks like everything is coming down to we are going to change our insurance provider. They give nonprofits a little bit better deal than municipalities. So if we get off the municipality insurance and get on that, it'll be cheaper. Fundraising event. This is the big one for the year. They have confirmed that Lisa Laflamme will be speaking at a dinner sometime in September. Now we just have to do the logistics, meal prices, accommodations, all that fine stuff. We're looking at a venue that seats 130, which is most of the local venues are 130. It's almost like our building inspectors have a fixed number, but the square footage is generally about the right size anyway. Maple Syrup Festival, we'll be doing a story walk. Rough copies here for anybody who wants to have a look. And it's got a thing in the back for local businesses. You like that one, Shelley? Oh, you have yours. Okay. Oh, okay.
Sharon.
Now, if, I gave them all away. Can I borrow yours for a second? So what we're trying to do is a local initiative. You can get your logo here for $50, your business logo. And it will be put at one of the stations in the story walk. They will all be collected at the end, and there will be prizes at the library for people who can complete the story walk. It's a pretty simple program. It gets the kids and their families involved. And it gets them out moving around the town so they get to see the different businesses in the town anyway. So there's that. So if you know any businesses that want to get involved in that, you can point that out to them. The walk will start on April 1st, and the completed pamphlets can be turned in at the library for maple sugar treat. There will also be a draw for a maple themed basket at the library on the day of the festival. There will also be refreshments served at the library on the day of the festival for a small donation. There will also be craft items for sale, but there generally are for every special event there. The teen hour update. Remember I was saying they were run a little ragged? Well, we put protocols in place, and looks like our teenagers like parameters because everything's settled down. Now they have a good group that comes in 2 hours every day and it's working out just fine. A little bit of structure and some parameters. It's like parenting 101, you know. And in most cases, it gives them a place to go where they can hang out with friends instead of going home to an empty house while they're waiting for their parents to get home. So it's working out really well. And they've actually they were approached by Marie and Jen about anything that they could input, or is there something we could do to make it better for them? They said, well, how about a couple of picnic tables outside for when the weather gets better? So we're looking at that, because if they're hanging out at the library, there are far worse venues to hang out for teenagers than a library. So it can't, to me, I think it's a good thing. Applying for the senior, there's a new grant. It's called the Hustle and Bustle Grant for seniors for getting them downtown. It's a busing program. So we're applying for the grant, it's a $12,000 grant for busing from the Pines, Meadowview, and East Home, and possibly Clark House to accommodate the staff living there. The initial plan is to have a Thursday bus that would pick up at these places and drop off in the downtown area, and the library, of course, for seniors programs and blood work clinic. We are in talks with East Ferris Bus Lines to work out a program should the funding come through. They're pretty much on board with it. They're trying to, what they're saying is they could fit it into their schedule between their 9 o'clock and 2:30. When they drop the kids off, the bus will already be in town, so they could do that. And we're also talking with the local service providers like dentists, medical, and try to accommodate seniors' appointments to schedule them on those days. And the Trillium grant, the application has to be in by June 14th. We're applying for that. Again, the plan is to bring the building lighting up to date if we get the grant. And the budget has been adopted, and the total budget came in at 2.3% without going into reserves or depleting services. And it only took 5 readings.
So the library is 2.3.
And we put in 3.5 of that. No, the total turned out at 2.3.
Okay. Any idea when they're going to send us out the information?
No idea.
Thank you.
I thought you would have probably got that before I got this written, but okay.
I'll follow up.
All right. And that's all I have for the library, I think. Okay. And our next meeting will be on April 29th. No, our next meeting will be March 27th, sorry.
Okay, that's your jumping one there. Okay, Council Butler. Okay. There was an East Home meeting Wednesday, February 22nd, and it was the same as we had tonight from our auditor. East Home had an unqualified, same as Nipissing, highest level report by accounting standards, clean management letter with no statements of uncompliance, and reserves are fully funded. And it's interesting, we submit a reconciliation of surplus and or debt from government monies every year. And we just had to submit it for 2022. We're still waiting for the government response from 2018. So that just gives you an idea. They're 4 years behind. Staffing, we continue to recruit and have students from Nipissing, Canadore, and CTS right now. We have no dates confirmed for our 3 remaining temporary foreign workers. And we did, with the help of the temporary foreign workers and our present staff, we hit the hours of care target, 3 hours and 42 minutes by March 1st. Building maintenance capital, just to give you an idea, it just blows me away. We had to get a new refrigerator on S3, so South Wayne, 3rd floor. New refrigerator, $15,000. They need an ice machine for the kitchen to cool everything when it goes upstairs. The ice machine's $8,000. Steamer for the main kitchen, $15,000. So it's not, I'm just always, I can't believe it. But anyway, by using grants in reserves. The budget came in at 3.5%. Nipissing portion went up 4,125. If anybody ever asks you, you have the budget sheets now and you can look at, but we pay $137,477 to East Home annually. So we pay a hefty price. On that note, screening must still continue, but no funding after April 1st. Screening costs $100,000 a month. So the kits really aren't free and they have to have staff there and everybody has to be screened every two days. Now in the budget package and East Home, you got it, it's in your binder now. The budget package you received from East Home, you'll see that part of our levy goes to support raw food expenses because East Home overspends on raw food constantly. So the question was, why do you overspend on raw food? And this year, we've got an increase from the government for raw food. So now, every East Home resident for raw food, they get $11 per day. That's 3 meals and 2 snacks, and then can't exceed $11. So that's why part of our levy goes towards raw food, because you just can't eat 3 meals and 2 snacks for $11 a day. So in this case, and the rest of the levy went to meeting the new government standard of 3 hours and 44 minutes, which means increase in staff and basically paying for them. It was also noted that our critical incidents, these are reports to the ministry, have decreased from 17 in 2021 to 8 in 2022. So that's decreased, but our level of care needed for residents has increased because there's a much higher rate of dementia, Alzheimer's patients than there ever was before. Now, to help with that, the government has increased the number of inspectors, where I believe the money would be better spent hiring more frontline workers, but instead they hired another 77 inspectors in the province, so more people to oversee, to look to see if you're going to screw up or not. Anyway, our next meeting is March 22nd at 10 now. And I say this every year, that is the annual general meeting. They have to have an annual general meeting every year. And every councillor and mayor and all of the municipalities to support East Home, you're all cordially invited to come. It'll sure be fun. But anyway, and so that's next meeting, March 22nd, and that's all I have for East Home. Any questions? You missed a lot of meals if you only got $11 a day. But we will move on. And we're number 9 to appoint a member to Nipissing Museum Board. And
We had one applicant.
we had one applicant, so I think we should support that applicant. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Butler and Councillor Kirky. So it's number R 2023-59, moved by Councillor Butler, seconded by Councillor Kirky, that we appoint Nora Jackson to the Nipissing Township Museum Board of Management for the remainder of the council term. All in favor? Carried. You'll notice tonight, and for the last 12 years, I am sporting the same fleece from Nipissing Township, and underneath this is a short sleeve shirt. Tom has one the same. What we're looking at is getting everybody apparel Same as the previous terms, if any, and if anybody wants anything in addition, like 4 of these, you get 1, you can pay for the other 3. We haven't done this in 2 terms, so it's been a little while, and it's just public recognition, basically, when you're out there. I know, I always notice East Ferris all have sport coats, jackets, that kind of thing. A little overdressed for myself. So this is what we've gone with in the past, and if we want to continue to do so, I know Kristen's taken sizes, and we can move on. We just need somebody to authorize purchase. So I need a mover and a seconder, and then I will read it. Councillor Yam and Councillor Foote. So it's number R 2023-60, moved by Councillor Yam, seconded by Councillor Foote, that we authorize the purchase of Township of Nipissing Parafor Council and administrative staff. So there's 3 of them. All in favor? Carried. We have been a little tardy on this, have we not, Councillor Kirky?
I'm fine.
Okay. Well, now I know what to wear on Tuesday nights. This is from the last meeting, and we decided to donate $100 to Blossom Maple Syrup Festival. So I need a mover and a seconder, Councillor Butler and Councillor Kirky. It's number R 2023-61, moved by Councillor Butler, seconded by Councillor Kirky, that we donate $100 to the Blossom Maple Syrup Festival for the 2023 event. All in favor? Read. Now, I think we went over the complaint policy before. We've only received 1 written complaint since then regarding snow plowing. I responded, and since Dan has been up there, we've taken pictures, and we've, as per the complaint policy, they received a written, well, it's by mail, so I don't know if they received it. It was written. I don't know if they received it yet as per the mail, whatever, but formal complaint, and we responded. Now, on the complaint policy, it was, we had 1 revision. Is there anything else that we need to do? I didn't see anything.
No.
If not, then we will accept this. So again, I need a mover and a seconder. Okay, Councillor Foote and Councillor Kirky. It's number R 2023-62, moved by Councillor Foote, seconded by Councillor Kirky, that we adopt complaint policy number 2019-02, revision 1 as formal complaint procedure for the Township of Nipissing. All in favor? Carried. Now, in yours, we all had the tax ratios, and they're the same. Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed from last year. These are set by OPTA, which is the Ontario Property Tax Analysis Program. We run all of our tax information through there, and it's just how we spread out the tax levy.
So I need a mover, the seconder, Councillor Yam and Councillor Kirky. So it's number R 2023-63, moved by Councillor Yam, seconded by Councillor Kirky, that we pass bylaw number 2023-18, being a bylaw to set tax ratios for municipal purposes for the year 2023, read a first, second, and third time, and pass this 7th day of March 2023. All in favor?
For the municipal, or for the
Right,
museum
this is for
manager.
the museum. Position description. I need a mover and a seconder. Counselor Yem and Counselor Turkey. Please. Number R 2023-64, moved by Counselor Yem, seconded by Counselor Kirkby, that we pass bylaw number 2023-19, being a bylaw to adopt a municipal position description for the museum manager position for the Township of Nipissing. Read a first, second, and third time and passed the 7th day of March 2023. All in favor? Carried. Should I mention that Thursday? Yes. Our bylaw,
The Ontario Land Tribunal Case Management Meeting takes place Thursday morning at 10 a.m.
that's over the trailer bylaw.
Okay, and should we be there, or where is this occurring?
It's going to be via a platform much like Zoom. I don't know the name of it.
Live stream though.
And
Live stream.
our lawyer and the planner that we've retained for this will be representing the township. Jean Paul and I will be sitting in just to watch. So if you'd like to join us at the township office, we do have the link and you can come and watch there. I don't believe it's a public proceeding, is it?
No, I don't think
Unless
so.
you put
It's on
your
a
name in and
go-to.
requested it. It was circulated.
Right,
Yeah, you have
So-
to become like a representative to speak.
Correct.
yep, so if you.
But as counselors, we can
You can
watch.
come and sit with us.
So when is it again?
10 a.m. on
Thursday, 10.
Thursday.
10 a.m. on
10,
Thursday,
like 2 days from now.
yeah.
But
Okay,
none of us have to. All
no,
we
I
have
know.
to do is make sure we have staff there. And you and I were the only two on council that can get blamed for that. And we'll move along to correspondence. Resolution for the township requesting the support for future accuracy of the permanent register of electors. Traditionally, MPACT did the register of electors. They're moving it from MPACT. And they're requesting that the province of Ontario, Elections Ontario, and the chief electoral officer utilize any resources available to produce the highest quality permanent register of electors. We're assuming that the government was going to do that anyway. They haven't even started it yet. It won't be for 3 more years that the first one comes out. So I would suggest this is an information item. The next one, the County of Huron calls for review and amendments for the Cannabis Act and the current legislative framework for cannabis in Canada. Luckily, this is going to AMO, so they will look at it. They're looking at setbacks, just like we have for farms, that kind of thing. So they're going to look at it and then they will suggest what to do.
I think when I was reading this, I think Huron County was talking about using this because they're a rural community as well.
Yeah.
They're talking about the same setbacks
Yes.
as they use for farms.
Yes,
So,
exactly. And so whether the government accepts that or not, but AMO is going to study it and make recommendations on our behalf. The town of Coburg, homelessness is a social, economic, and health crisis. I think we all realize that. The provincial government, the federal government, and every government in between is looking into it. They didn't ask us for support. They just pointed out that it is an ongoing thing and that Coburg cannot afford to handle it on their own. So they're asking for provincial and federal money to help do that. And I think you'll see later on, we have another one basically on the same thing for homelessness. So it's information. Okay, the next one, this one's interesting, number 4. Regarding the use of floating accommodations and camping on water over public lands in Ontario. In addition, minor changes listed below are proposed for added clarity and consistency in the regulation. What it came out as originally, and we saw this, and the township has responded in the info gathering stage, but these are basically floating, and a lot of them are containers. Like, the containers, they cut holes in them, put them on a barge, and they float them, and then you live on them. And now there's environmental concerns. So what they've looked at here, and they call them camp on water over public land, liveaboards and houseboats. So you can still do that, but they're excluding floating accommodations, float homes, and barges with residential units. And what they're looking at is for the others, 21 days. So you have to move them. Because otherwise somebody could park it legally in front of your place with their float home. And so these are the rules that they made. You have to move them. They have to be 100 meters to 1 kilometer and not within 300 meters of a developed shoreline where we live, including any waterfront structure, dock, boathouse, erosion control, altered shoreline, boat launch, and or fill. So they can't be within 300 meters because they were, yes,
The 21-day is taken from the dry land camping,
yes,
and the moving for, is it a kilometer? No?
yes.
The 100 meters was taken from dry land camping too. Run into this with the moose camp years ago. We moved it across the field and we were good for the rest of the season. But
So they moved it a little farther.
yeah,
And again, because this water camping is this, they're saying people are doing it now.
well, it's not camping, it's residing.
Yes. And clarify that camping on a road trailer, parking lot, or boat launch is prohibited. And we ran into this at the start of COVID. People came up and parked right on the boat ramp, but if you want more information on this, session 2 is on Monday, March 20th at 2 to 3:30 p.m. And you email publiclands@ontario.ca. But I'm hoping they do a good job with this. But they had all kinds of pictures of containers on barges, and they'd tow them out and leave you in front of somebody's house. Wouldn't go over well.
No,
We don't need that.
No. Number 5.
That's
Yes.
something that could seriously affect, say, someplace like the South Bay or the West Arm or the Upper French, protected areas like that have islands around them where you're out of the weather.
yeah,
That's very attractive
Oh,
to
yeah.
stuff like this. So
yeah,
worth our trouble to look into it.
yeah.
Yes. And they have, and this is just their discussion paper. Number 5 again is they want declaration of emergency for homelessness, mental health, and opioid addiction, and I know we all agree with it. And it's an information circulated to all 444 townships and municipalities in Ontario. And the last one in the news this week out of North Bay is an info item that government income-based policies can reduce food insecurities by providing low-income households with more money. Go figure. So if we give low-income households more money, they could use it to get rid of food insecurity, and I think we all understand that, and it's an info item as well. as long as they use it for food insecurities. So that's all for correspondence, and if there are no questions, we'll get a mover in the second. You guys didn't even. So Councillor Butler, Councillor Foote, you gotta get quicker on this. Number R 202365, moved by Councillor Butler, seconded by Councillor Kirky, that we accept the correspondence as presented. All in favor? There. And those accounts. Are there any questions about the accounts? You got the abridged version with the yellow on it. Any comments or questions? If not, move into seconder. Thank you, Councillor Foote and Councillor Yam. Councillor Yam was quick to put his hand up for correspondence. These two. It's number R 2023-66, moved by Councillor Foote, seconded by Councillor Yam, that the statement of accounts dated March 2nd and 6th, 2023, totaling $102,620.31 be approved. All in favor? Carried.
I believe Dan has something to add for repair on one of the trucks.
Oh, Ben, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I just got a phone call. We took the F-350 into Ford. We had an exhaust leak and the manifolds that broke on both sides. So it's gonna be quite the costly fix. It's probably around $10,000 to manifolds and loose springs need to be fixed on it also.
We had placed this truck for, to be replaced on this capital forecast in previous years, but then when we had to buy the other tandem, it got pushed back, so it needs to be replaced. It's just something that we're hoping to put off for a little bit.
But I bring it to your attention that it's gonna be a costly one.
Not much you can do about it, is there?
No, I mean, we need it.
Okay, well, thanks for that.
I'm always.
You are always full of good news.
Now, have we looked at putting the 2010 out there for sale?
Not yet, it's coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, we kind of wanted to get rid of the two, like the new truck coming in and make sure we had backups until that happened, but we are gonna put it up for sale shortly.
We just finished up the transaction with Chisholm for the old one.
Okay.
This week, we still have paperwork that we were finishing. So that's all done and paid now.
Okay. Confirming bylaw. I need a mover and a second. Councillor Kirkby and Councillor Foote. So it's number R 2023-67, moved by Councillor Kirkby, seconded by Councillor Foote, that we pass bylaw number 2023-20, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held on March 7th, 2023, read the first, second, and third time, passes 7th day of March, 2023. All in favor? Carried. And last but not least, adjournment. Councillor Butler and Councillor Yam. R 2023-68, moved by Councillor Butler, seconded by Councillor Yam, that the meeting be adjourned at 8:58 p.m. Next regular meeting to be held March 21st, 2023. All in favor? Carried. next meeting is our,
I'd like to make that the final budget meeting. Well, the next budget meeting.
This is our homework? This is our homework?
That's just an update to the capital forecast. We made some changes to move some things around.
Okay.
Oscar's departure. Up and
Well, actually, he gave me some good news, so
Yeah.
I'm hoping to find some